On August 19, 1944, deep inside Wehrmacht headquarters in East Prussia, Generaloberst Alfred Jodl sat beneath the heavy timbers of Hitler's Wolfschanz reviewing intelligence reports from a Western front that appeared, at least on paper, to be approaching its natural limit, because according to every calculation German military science had ever trusted, the American advance led by George Patton's Third Army should have been grinding to a halt at any moment, strangled by the same tyranny of distance that had destroyed German ambitions in Russia, with Allied supply lines now stretched more than 400 miles from the Normandy beaches over shattered roads, ruined bridges, and a transportation network deliberately wrecked by retreating German forces, and Jodl's staff officers had done the math with a confidence born of experience. Knowing that an armored division burned through roughly 150,000 gallons of fuel every day when advancing, knowing that infantry divisions required hundreds of tons of food, ammunition, and medical supplies daily, knowing that Patton commanded 12 divisions advancing on a narrow front, and knowing that no army in history had ever outrun logistics without paying the price, because machines demanded fuel, parts, and maintenance just as soldiers demanded food and rest, and history, especially German history, had taught them that speed always ended in paralysis. That blitzkrieg without supply collapsed into exhaustion, and that the Americans, no matter how loud or confident, could not violate physical law. Yet what Jodl did not know was that even as those calculations were being finalized, nearly 6,000 trucks were already moving eastward in an unbroken river of steel and headlights, defying every rule of German military doctrine, carrying more than 12,000 tons of supplies every single day along a one-way highway system that German logistics officers had never conceived possible, an operation called the Red Ball Express that would shatter not only German defensive plans but German understanding of modern warfare itself, because within 72 hours Patton's tanks would smash through German positions on the Seine, within a week Paris would be liberated, and within a month American forces would be standing on the German border, all powered by an army that did not fight with rifles or tanks but with engines, gasoline, and human endurance, delivered by 23,000 truck drivers, 3/4 of them African American, serving in a segregated army that relied on them to keep its most celebrated generals moving forward, and the German confidence that American logistics would fail was not arrogance but reasoned belief, rooted in decades of operational experience, because the Wehrmacht had pioneered blitzkrieg, mastered combined arms warfare, and understood supply lines intimately, having seen their own offensives stall not from enemy resistance but from logistical collapse. Especially in Russia where broken roads, incompatible rail gauges, mechanical failures, and reliance on horse-drawn transport had doomed German advances long before Soviet counterattacks, and German intelligence tracked American consumption rates meticulously, noting that a single Sherman tank averaged half a mile per gallon on roads and far worse cross-country, that an infantry division required 700 tons of supplies daily, that an armored division needed 1,000, and that Patton's forces demanded at least 12,000 tons per day transported across 400 miles of damaged infrastructure, a mathematical impossibility by German standards, prompting officers like General Major Siegfried Westphal to conclude that even with unlimited trucks, perfect roads, and no mechanical failures, which no army ever possessed, the Americans could sustain their advance for no more than 48 hours, because physical laws could not be violated, not even by American industry. Yet on August 25, 1944, in a requisitioned French chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres of the Motor Transport Service stood before skeptical officers and proposed something so audacious it bordered on madness, announcing that traditional supply methods had collapsed and that the only solution was to create a one-way highway system running 20 hours a day with absolute priority, no stopping except for fuel or breakdowns, moving at least 12,500 tons daily under a system borrowed from railroad express freight terminology, the Red Ball Express, where two parallel routes would carry loaded trucks forward and empty trucks back, headlights blazing through the night, blackout discipline abandoned, 5-minute convoy intervals maintained at an average speed of 35 miles per hour, with military police removing any vehicle that slowed below 25, and mobile maintenance units stationed every 50 miles, a concept that violated everything German military doctrine held sacred, because it rejected concealment, accepted massive mechanical attrition, and relied not on precision but on overwhelming volume. Yet within 36 hours the impossible was operational, and on August 26 drivers climbed into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks, the Deuce and a Half, loaded with artillery shells bound for Patton's guns hundreds of miles east, and the demographic reality of the Red Ball Express would have horrified Nazi racial theorists, because the majority of those drivers were African-American soldiers denied equal rights at home but entrusted with the logistical backbone of the Allied advance, men who quickly developed their own culture, painting slogans on their trucks, enforcing ruthless traffic discipline, pushing broken vehicles into ditches without hesitation, and treating anything under 20 miles per hour as an obstruction. And within days German reconnaissance units began reporting something. Unprecedented, endless columns of vehicles visible for miles, headlights blazing, no spacing, no camouflage, an apparent abandonment of every military precaution. Yet the columns kept moving, hour after hour, night after night, until even hardened German commanders like General Edgar Feuchtinger of the 21st Panzer Division reported in alarm that the enemy operated a supply system beyond comprehension, not based on military science but on mass production applied to warfare, because American logistics followed principles utterly alien to German thinking. Accepting waste, planning for failure through redundancy, improvising continuously at every level, and solving problems with speed rather than procedure, producing numbers that German officers dismissed as propaganda until they realized the supplies kept coming. With nearly 90,000 tons delivered in the first week alone, thousands of trucks rotating continuously, fuel consumption reaching hundreds of thousands of gallons daily just to keep the system moving. Yet fuel never ran short because Americans had created parallel miracles like undersea pipelines across the English Channel, forward fuel dumps every 25 miles, tanker convoys feeding convoys, ensuring no truck waited more than minutes for gasoline, and as German aerial reconnaissance revealed fuel reserves larger than their entire strategic stockpiles, the realization set in that this was not simply an army but industrial overflow, a civilization at war, and the impact on the battlefield was immediate and devastating. As Patton's divisions advanced at rates German planners believed impossible, 40 to 60 miles per day sustained for weeks, with units halting briefly for resupply only to surge forward again the same afternoon, shattering defensive plans built around 30-mile maximum advances, prompting disbelief even from figures like Heinz Guderian until intercepted radio traffic confirmed the truth, that American units were broadcasting openly, confident they could outrun any German response. And by early September German intelligence compiled comprehensive assessments concluding that every assumption about American limitations was wrong, that Americans abandoned vehicles rather than repair them, exhausted drivers without hesitation, burned fuel in quantities no European army could imagine, yet succeeded because they had more of everything and the will to use it, leading Field Marshal Walter Model to remark grimly that Germany faced not a superior army but a superior civilization, because the Red Ball Express drivers themselves paid a brutal price, operating for days without sleep, surviving accidents that killed hundreds, enduring mechanical fires, collisions, and exhaustion-induced hallucinations. Yet morale remained astonishingly high because many understood they were proving something far larger than a supply schedule, disproving Nazi racial ideology mile by mile, ton by ton, and captured German officers admitted openly that once they grasped the American supply system they knew the war was lost, because no tactical brilliance could overcome an enemy that could supply armies faster than they could be destroyed, an enemy whose trucks outnumbered their vehicles and whose factories replaced losses faster than they could inflict them. And as the front moved east the Red Ball Express adapted instantly, spawning new routes overnight, building bridges in hours instead of weeks, reconstructing rail lines while convoys still ran, delivering ammunition in quantities that allowed American artillery to fire without restriction while German guns rationed shells, consuming trucks at rates that would have crippled any other force yet never slowing because replacements arrived weekly from American ports, all of it witnessed by French civilians who saw abundance replace scarcity and resistance explode along convoy routes, until even when the system strained under distance, it reorganized itself within days and emerged stronger, supplemented by massive aerial resupply operations that dwarfed anything the Luftwaffe had ever attempted, further crushing German hopes, because Americans treated logistics not as a fragile lifeline but as an expendable weapon, operated through decentralized command that empowered junior officers and sergeants to make decisions German generals would never delegate, producing controlled chaos that baffled rigid hierarchy but delivered results, and by October railheads reduced the need for trucks, ending an operation that was supposed to last 10 days after 82, having delivered more than 400,000 tons of supplies over more than 200 million ton-miles, prompting German commanders to conclude with bitter clarity that they had not been defeated by tanks or aircraft but by trucks. And beyond its military impact, the Red Ball Express forced a racial reckoning within the American Army itself, highlighting the contradiction of segregation amid undeniable contribution, contributing to pressures that would eventually lead to desegregation, while post-war logistics around the world absorbed its lessons, that volume overcomes inefficiency, redundancy eliminates vulnerability, decentralization enables speed, and industrial capacity determines victory, lessons German officers admitted they learned too late, because when German generals surrendered in 1945, many cited the Red Ball Express specifically as proof that continued resistance was hopeless, having realized they were fighting not just soldiers but an entire society mobilized for production. And in the end, the operation stood as the clearest demonstration that in modern warfare logistics is not support but strategy itself, that trucks can defeat tanks, that abundance can overwhelm excellence, and that the roar of 6,000 engines moving day and night across France carried with it the sound of German defeat. A truth summarized by an anonymous German officer watching the endless convoy pass, who asked in disbelief how one defeats an enemy with more trucks than soldiers, a question answered not by theory but by history. Because the Red Ball Express turned supply into victory, movement into momentum, and logistics into the most decisive weapon of the European war.